For anyone is unaware, this is David Crandall. He is musician and sound engineer in Baltimore, holds an MFA in digital arts at UMBC. And we're going to be talking about frequently asked questions about online playing, which is a very good topic for this current climate or the new normal that we are in.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Without much ado, I'll hand over to you, David. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, for starters, what I'm going to say is that I want this to be a conversation as much as possible. So if you have questions along the way, type them into the chat, and Jean will alert me that there's a question. Meanwhile, I will just keep yakking away. And also, since I don't think my image is particularly doing any of you guys any good, I'm going to share the document. This should be available also on the, this should be available also on the, I guess, the the Baltimore Jazz Alliance website for download, or if anybody wants me to send it to them, I can send you the PDF. What I plan to do is I'm going to talk about the things I don't want to talk about. Then I'm going to talk about the things that I am going to talk about, and then I'm going to talk about those things. So it'll be a kind of a three-part thing. What I want to start off with is, actually, let me make sure I can. Yeah, Jean, you will have to alert me, because apparently I can't see my chats. I can't see my chat if I'm looking at the online.
Oh, sure. No problem.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
Okay. The first page of this is just a general overview of the various ways of playing online. And I'm going to trust you guys to read a lot of this on your own, and I will try to just amplify this material. The first big category of playing online is has to do with music that's got an arrangement, and that would be classical music, pop tunes. I have a friend whose bluegrass band made an online album, which is now #1 on Billboard, best bluegrass album in the country. This is all done by laying out the arrangement that you want to play, and then you can do scratch tracks or a rhythm track or whatever, send it out to everyone. They can put it on earbuds on their phone, play along with it into a better, quality recorder, and then somebody assembles it all at the end. And this is, we heard early in the shutdown that, this plucky glee club did their concert anyway, and it was people, the singers all sent in their tracks that way. There are some paid applications that you can use. Acapella only works on an iPhone. A lot of choirs use that. These are paid. There's a subscription. Soundtrap is basically an online version of GarageBand. People can just put together a project, contribute to it, and various people can contribute to it. And it's all online rather than on somebody's computer. So Audio Movers is really, if anyone remembers the old ISDN technology, where you could have someone performing from another city and the producer could be talking back to them and saying, make it a little bit more this way or that way. That was a really expensive technology, and only studios had it. Audio Movers does it for a monthly fee, and it's another way to do that. The rest of the apps that I'm going to address are for jamming, because what we want in jazz is you start playing your solo, you play till you're done, and then someone else takes over and they do their solo, and it's not a prearranged arrangement. I'm going to just talk for just a moment to define the two types. One is what I call phrase jamming, which is that you sign on to an app, you get a bunch of people signed on to a connection, and you establish a phrase, let's say 16-bar phrase, and then you establish a tempo, and then you get a metronome and everyone plays to the tempo. But what happens is one player plays into the buffer and then the others hear it the next time through the repetition. So you're always playing with the previous version of what other people played. There's a couple of apps that are for this. One of them that I really haven't really explored that much, but I think it looks very intriguing, is Ninjam. It's been around forever. Maybe the most interesting thing about that is to look at their archive page, and they have hundreds and hundreds of tracks because the app automatically records to archive.org, and you can find all kinds of stuff and get ideas about what kind of music you could make using this looping kind of paradigm. What we want to talk about is what I call near real-time jamming, and it's to create a connection with the shortest latency possible, around 30 milliseconds. That is comparable to if you were playing with someone who's 30 feet away. That's about the same delay you would get. That would correspond to, if you were in a big orchestra, the difference between the string bass player on one side and the last violin player on the other side of the stage might be 30 milliseconds. So it's not instantaneous, but people find that it's fairly close, and you can do some playing. Before I jump into talking about the different individual programs, I'll jump back up the page. All of these apps work on a client-server model, which is that the people who are playing individually are sending their music into a central server, which is assembling that stream and sending it back out so everyone can hear it. You can set up your own server, or you can use public ones that are pre-existing. We'll get into this later on in this session. The other thing to point out is that these apps use a different type of connection from TCP, which is what almost all the rest of the internet traffic is. TCP works by doing error correction. And the way that works is, if you've ever known anybody who are one of those people who finish every sentence with, you know what I mean? If you've known people like that, this is what happens. TCP, the sender sends a packet of data and it says, did you get it? And if it doesn't get an answer back, it sends it again. And it waits, it keeps sending it until it gets a reply, yes, I got it. So it's data, did you get it? Yes, I got it. Data, did you get it? Yes, I got it. Which is why when you have a bad connection, it's so slow. It's because it's sending data over and over until it goes through. UDP is more like the presidential debate, where you have both sides are just sending data without bothering to find out if the other side got it, which means it's much faster. The trade-off is that if data drops out, you just get a glitch. If a lot of data drops out, you get a really noisy signal. So what happens is you'll have a buffer that corresponds to how much sound you're sending out at a given time, and you make that longer or shorter to trade off between stability and latency. And latency means the delay from when my voice comes out of my mouth to when you're hearing it on your end. That's the latency. One of the things that happens with this stuff is that the closer you are geographically, the better all this works. So if you create a private server here in Baltimore and you're talking to other Baltimore players, you're going to have a very good chance of creating a nice, quick connection without a lot of data crashing out. The other downside of this is that, well, if it's a downside, is you really need to be comfortable doing things like going into your router, making changes. I'll show you how I make changes on my own particular router. It's not really that bad. There's a certain amount of command line programming, which means you pull up a command window and type commands in rather than using your mouse to interact with the computer. Once you get used to it, it's not too bad, and none of this stuff is horribly complex. The other thing I'll point out about a lot of these programs is that many of them have been around for a really long time. Various geeky types of people, the whole open source community has been working on this for really over a decade. And a lot of these projects had even started to die out for lack of interest. And then the COVID phenomenon came along, and now everyone's suddenly interested in it again. The thing to point out about that is that there's a lot of obsolete information running around. Early versions of some of these software programs would require you to, for example, have to manually set the IP address on your computer, which normally it's set automatically. Well, that's no longer the case. You can use the automatic connection on your computer. You just have to watch out in case your computer connection changes address for some strange reason in the middle of a session. This is something that really rarely happens. Shoot me a question if you don't understand the difference between automatic and manual address connection. But I will just say that most of the connections you guys are using, including the one I'm on right now, is using, it's just set up the way your service provider sets it up, and it's automatic and it just goes. Okay. To quickly finish the page, in order, Jack Trip is a very basic, really fast, high quality, and very stable connection you can get through Jack Trip. There's a big community working on this. There are people working it. The basic version of Jack Trip is that it creates a one-to-one, one player and one listener connection. A lot of people are working on doing this for larger groups. If you're into open source software and tinkering with this stuff, it's a very fun area to get into. Lots of tutorials. But again, the caveat is a lot of old information out there. It uses an audio driver called Jack, which is also becoming more and more popular as a way, especially on Windows, to route audio signals around in your computer. More and more apps are using Jack, or using Jack as the invisible back end of what they're doing. Sound Jack takes Jack Trip and puts it in a wrapper so that it runs in a browser. It runs in Chrome. Both Jack Trip and Sound Jack are free. Sound Jack is a little friendlier because it brings a lot of the adjustments out to the browser window, so you can tweak it right there in your session as you're playing, as opposed to having to go to another window and type in a different value and so forth. And it's a little bit more user-friendly in that way. And Jam Kazam, which one person has already mentioned that they're using or are playing with. And there's more and more of these apps that are trying to take all this technology and put it in a wrapper so that it's a lot of the details are taken care of by the application. You don't have to do a lot of tinkering with it. I'm not so sure they all work that well. Jam Kazam tries to organize people into groups, and there's a sort of a social media component they're trying to come up with. And there are paid components. You can buy pre-recorded backing tracks to play along with if you want to in Jam Kazam. And there's things like that. There's more and more people jumping into that area. The one I want to talk about today is called Jamulus, because, and I have to do a big shout out to Chris Belgica. He's a guitar player here in town, who was extremely patient and helped me figure out how to get this working, and drove us both a little bit crazy, but we finally got it working, and I finally got to where I feel like I can explain it. The other one we tried was Jammer, which is a little bit up the page, and we never got it working well enough that we felt super comfortable jamming. Part of it is that having a metronome is just kind of a drag for me. I think a lot of people who use those phrase jamming apps will have, for example, the drummer will listen to the click track and play, and then everybody else just plays along with the drummer without having to listen to the metronome, which seems to work pretty well. I mean, I've been on Jammer and heard people do some pretty good stuff, and some of the Ninjam stuff is also pretty interesting. But Jamulus, before I jump into the program itself, here's the kind of second phase of this. I want to talk a little bit about setting up audio, because what you have to do is you need to hear what the other people are doing. And if you play, say, an electric guitar or a software instrument or a synthesizer, you've got to hear yourself as well. So the easiest way to do that is if you have an amp or headphones, and then you just you use a physical mixer to put together the signals and send it into, you just use one output to the computer. So you're sending one thing into the computer and you're getting one thing back, which is either you're monitoring for yourself, but also the other players. One of the things that's common through all of these programs, including even Zoom, is that if you're playing, you're not going to hear yourself. The program will mute your input back to your headphones or speakers. So that's a little bit of a thing to get used to. Setup will generally require a couple of inputs, unless you're a singer, in which case you can talk about the music and you can also make the music. But if you're what I do on my setup is I use one mic to talk into, which is dry, and I'll use another mic for playing, which has got a little bit of reverb on it and some things to EQ, something to dress up the signal, make it sound a little bit better. Multi-channel, let's see. Yes, some interfaces will come with a mixer app that you can also use to send a virtual signal out to the program, and also a signal for you to send back to your monitor. So you can handle that sometimes with a software mixer. What you have to do is the software you're sending out to the internet needs to be set to listen to an internal audio signal from the computer. This also applies to Zoom or Skype. I'm doing a Zoomer tomorrow where some actors are performing a script, and I'm going to be supplying the sound effects. I need to tell my sound effects software to talk to Zoom through a virtual channel. We'll get in the next page. I will just really quickly say that there's system resources for internal audio routing, and we'll see this when we get to the details of how to do a Jamulus. I like Blackhole a lot. It's free. You install it, it just works. It shows up in the sound manager, and you're ready to go. Source Nexus is another one that appears to be the same. Soundflower was a virtual audio router that the people who make Max MSP, if you've heard of that, were putting out several years ago, and it's become obsolete. So if you have it on your computer, hang on to it, because you're not going to find an installer for it. Windows, I wish I were more familiar with how Windows works, but I highly recommend these links in terms of a good Reddit post that talks about the various ways of routing audio around the PC on Windows. And also there's a company called VB Audio, which makes something called virtual audio cable that you can use to route signals inside the computer and out to the internet, and a software mixer called Voice Meter. These products are free, so this is another plus for them. Jack is a virtual audio driver that works for Macs, Linux, Windows, and it's getting more and more popular. I talked about it a little bit. It combines an audio driver with a routing tool. I will stop to just point out that a lot of people who are working on this stuff are also working in the area of Linux. And that's a platform that's kind of keeps percolating along and growing. I think one day it's going to become even more important in this area. Okay. Any questions up till now? Or we? No. I will forge ahead. Setting up the internet connection. For starters, all of this stuff requires that you use a wired Ethernet connection to a router, and then the router talks to Comcast or whatever software, whatever service you have, Verizon. So you have two IP addresses. On my setup, I have the modem that I got from Comcast, and then it's connected to the router. The modem has what's called the public IP address. And that's the one that my whole setup uses to talk to Comcast. And then the router supplies a second address to talk to just my computer. It's like, my apartment building, the street number is 440 East Oliver, and then the apartment number is 3E. So the external router, the external IP address is like the street address, and the internal address is like the apartment number. Any computer can find out what the outside address is by just typing the phrase, "What is my IP address?" into a browser window. And if you want to be more specific, you can add IPv4, which is the version of connection that most folks are using these days. The internal address shows up in the network performance preferences control panel on the Mac. If I pull up the control panel, I see my Ethernet is talking to the router. And again, this is the automatic connection I'm talking about. It's DHCP rather than manual. So this is the particular address of my computer within my room here. And this is the address of the router. You'll use that address in a minute. On Windows, you can open a command window. You can do that by, I've forgotten what you type in. You click the Windows button and you get a blank that says run, and you type CMD. That's what it is. And you get a command window and you can type ipconfig, ipconfig, and it will give you the listing of these numbers that are here. You use that IP address, the router address, open up a browser on your computer and just type those numbers into the address field, and you get to your router. You will need to find the password to your router, which is maybe still the password that's on a sticker on the bottom of the router. Use that to get into the control area, and it gives you a web page that gives all the different ways to control the router. You want to look for advanced, and there's something on mine is called NAT forwarding. Others will say port forwarding or whatever. What you're going to do is you're going to forward data to a particular port on your computer. This is equivalent to if I lived in an apartment building that had a doorman, and I told the doorman, if Amazon shows up with a package that says new sheet music on it, send them right to my room and tell them to knock on my door. And then the doorman will let them through, but anybody else that comes along and says, I'm from UPS or whatever, he says, just drop it off in the lobby. That's how port forwarding works. It's permission to talk to a particular port that you open up that has a number. Each of these applications will tell you what port number they want you to use for their connection. So here's Jamulus. And in the Jamulus materials, it says, be sure to forward your port to 22124. And you tell it that it's a UDP protocol. This is that fast connection I was talking about. See, I'm set up for sound jack, and this is the port that their software requires. Oops. I'm also set up for jack trip, and jack trip requires a different port. So all of these three on my computer have been, I told the doorman, if anybody shows up with traffic for 22124, send it right in. And that's how the traffic gets to that piece of software. This port thing works on lots of various types of computer connections. So if you've done any of the more exotic things like, I don't know, OSC control of a synthesizer or something, you use that same technology. Setting up your audio, I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm most comfortable with the Mac method, so I'm going to walk you through that, and there'll be comparable things in the Windows world, but I think you guys will have to figure those out yourself. This is my control panel that I get in audio MIDI setup on my Mac. And what I have done is, these on the left are the top ones, are all the devices that are on my computer. I have built in my input and output. I have an interface hooked up. I have Black Hole installed and Source Nexus installed. What I have done on the Mac is to create what's called an aggregate device. And the way this works is that you can take any of these devices and combine them into a sort of super device. So I've got UMC, which is my Behringer interface, and Black Hole combined into a combined device. So the way this is working is the first 4 channels are talking to my interface, and then the next 16 channels are the virtual channels that I can use to send audio around inside the computer, and as it turns out to the internet. Something we found on Mac, and I'm not sure how this is handled on Windows, we had a big problem because I was setting the clock source to be the interface, and apparently this Behringer interface will work with its own clock source, but it doesn't send that information anywhere, so that the virtual channel was not getting clocked to the right, to the same reference, and I was getting very distorted audio. So if you set the clock source to the virtual device rather than the outside interface, it worked great. The other thing you want to make sure is that the sample rate is the same for all your applications that you're working with, although Jamulus does set that up automatically for you. Okay. The way I use my computer to combine signals is in Ableton Live, which I have, and I created a mix session. This is my microphone that for talking with no effects. This is the microphone that's got some sends to reverb. There's my 2 reverbs. I have a channel for a software bass that I can play on a keyboard. And this is all sent out so that the master output is going out channels 5 and 6, which you can see up here. Channels 5 and 6 are the first 2 of the virtual channels. We'll see that reappear when we set up the software. My Q output is so I can hear myself, and I can click on the headphones to select individual channels for me to hear myself. Okay, in Live, the audio settings will look like this. I've chosen that aggregate device to be the input and output. And here we go. And I've dialed and I've played with this buffer size to get the best compromise on my sound. Okay, start Jamulus. When you download Jamulus, you get two apps. You get one for the program, and then you get one if you want to set up a server, and we'll cover both of those things. So when you start off Jamulus, you get a blank panel that just looks like this, and it doesn't have anybody connected, including you. When you click on settings, you get a settings window, and here's where we pick the input to be sure to pick black hole 16 channels, and then out is going to my interface, such as, again, I'll be able to hear the signal coming from Jamulus. This is another place where I want to tweak this setting in the buffer delay. I'll pick whichever one gives me the best sound with the least amount of dropouts. And I want to try to get the shortest setting possible.
David, we had a question pop up. Can I?
Yeah, what's the question?
It said, from Matt, he said, great presentation. What other software would you recommend for a mix session? Would a DAW like Logic Pro or GarageBand work? I
don't know about GarageBand, but any other major piece of software, Cakewalk, Logic, Pro Tools even, what you want to do is you want to go in and you want to select some of them will have a particular mode for like reduce the latency as much as possible for recording. You want to select that, and you want to go into your settings and again, pick the smallest buffer size that will give you a usable signal. The general principle would be the same. I just like Live because it's just to me a very easy program to use. And I don't know about GarageBand. I did not talk about, let me just look to see if I missed something. There is another program and this is, your mileage may vary. I tried it. I really liked it. I found it to be unstable on my particular Mac, but you might have it work very well. And it's called Carla. There's a program, it's called Carla, and there's a sister program called Catia, C-A-T-I-A. Carla runs on Mac, Windows, and Linux, and Catia is a Linux-only version. And that gives you a little window that you can use to, you can pull devices in and connect them with wires, and it looks like a little mini version of Mac's MSP if you've ever used that. And when it worked great because it was very low latency. I could put all my effects on signals. It doesn't do any recording. It doesn't do anything like that. And all it does is combine signals and send them here and there. But if you can find it, it's easy to download and install. It's just called Carla. And so I would recommend that if you want to experiment a little bit. Hopefully that answered the question. Yeah, click the connection window. And when I click mine, usually here's what I get. You see that the possible connection, these are all people across the world who have set up servers and said, here, I'll be a public resource for people who want to jam. And we see one from Boston, which is only 13 milliseconds away, which is very short. If it's green, that means you're good to go. This means there's 10 slots, but there's nobody playing at the moment. So if I log on to that connection, that number will change to 1, and people around can see, oh, there's a guy on there, and sometimes join up. We'll come back to this window when we come to setting up a private server, because I will also cover that. So that's the connect window. That happens when you can click this button here. Connected session is going to look something like this. Everybody who's signed on to that server will get a channel. You can mute somebody if they're being really annoying. You can certainly mute them. You can turn them up and down. You can create your own mix among the various people connected. You can pan them. You can do a few basic mixery things. I haven't tried out the reverb on it, but there's a reverb that says you can bring it up. So I don't know. Your mileage may vary. There's a separate chat window, by the way. If I mute myself, then the others will not hear me, and it gives a big red alert saying nobody else can hear you, by the way. I did not try this tip here, but apparently if you're on a session and you solo a certain number of channels and those channels also solo you, then you can kind of create a subgroup, because so these three people could be playing one set of piece of music and these people could be playing a whole different piece. I haven't tried it out, but that may be something you can do. Getting in the home stretch here. If you want to create a private Jamulus server, or if you want to create a server to offer to the public for jamming, I did not try this myself, but I went through the instructions and they seem to make sense. So I'm going to try to explain it. You start the separate server app that downloaded with the program, and you get this window. And it's got blanks for this stuff. And what you are going to do is, you don't see anything apparently till someone else connects. So what you do is you go back to where we said, here's how to find your public IP address. You type, what is my IP address? You get those numbers, 3 numbers separated by periods. You contact your other players. You could maybe do it. Yeah, anyway, you contact the other players probably by email or text or something. Send those numbers to them and say, connect to this server. They will take that number, set of numbers, and they will type it in right here. And they will connect. At that point, they should show up here. And so this will tell you who all is connected to your private server. It seems to be just as simple as that. If you want to make your server public, you need to have a very fast computer and connection. You just click this, make my server public, and tell it what genre it is, and give yourself a name, tell them where you are, and so forth. And that's how you create a public server. It seems ridiculously simple. I'll have to try it out myself once I get done with this session. But that apparently, I will also point out that if you click on options, you should get an option where you can choose a directory on your computer and have it record the sessions, and it will record into that. Again, requires that much extra speed on your computer so you can pull all that off. But that's another option that you have. So,
David, what are the security implications of that, having a public server? And
well, I think, let me see. One of the things to keep in mind is that when you connect, you got the name, you've got the location, you've got your decision to connect to them, but you don't see their IP address there. So I think that helps. And also in the panel, you don't see their data anywhere as far as here's how to reach these people.
okay.
Now, in everything, there is a risk of, I mean, anytime you're online at all, I would highly advise that you have a firewall set up, and that this software, and you be very select about what piece of software you allow in. But that would be, again, highly recommended. That's about all I can say about security at this point. But any other questions, Matt? At this point, I can just throw it open and we can unmute and show our faces, and just shoot the bull for the rest of the session. But
I removed your spotlight, so everybody should be able to see us all. If we can do it. Yeah, there we go.
Okay. Well, if they don't want to talk, I'll just talk to you, Jim. Ian, are you there? I don't know if Ian's there.
I'm
Oh,
here.
good. There's Matt. Good.
Matt's here too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great presentation, and Jamulus is probably next on my list. As I was saying before, I think most of my challenges were with my colleagues, just getting them on board with the wired connection, and then the sort of willingness to mouse around a bit until we get it right, which is a specific. It's not always the same personality type that does creative improvised music and also wants to do that.
I've had a hard time. A lot of my jamming around town has been with the gypsy jazz community, and boy, they're just like, no. I want to sit on the porch with my friends, and that's it.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I was trying to get my new music friends in the classical community to say, you should try figuring out how to compose music where the latency is actually part of the music. But
that's what we're doing with our ensemble. Is just using that as a with the school at the university. So trying to embrace it as it's not a bug, it's a feature.
Yeah, exactly. I've been putting it the same exact way. I'm like, come on, So we'll see.
Quarter note equals whatever the latency is. Right?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what I mean. You could really do something weird like sign on to something like Ninjam or one of the phrase jam softwares and play with setting that to be really short, like 4 beats, make the loop 4 beats and just see how weird it gets. But a lot of people are playing with what you get on those apps is a lot of rock and roll people,
right?
A lot of like Grateful Dead kind of stuff, like a lot of jam band stuff,
right?
Yeah, I think nobody's played around with internet feedback. I mean, there are a lot of people playing with feedback in live performance, but I haven't heard anybody playing with internet feedback, which seems to be a pretty interesting concept.
And then everyone's latency is just defined, like you said, defined by their geographical distance.
Yeah.
And so we all get a different experience from our point of view, but that's how reality is anyway.
Yeah, and it might be, that's the thing. The latency is really and actually you can find charts that say, from Dusseldorf, Germany to Baltimore, it's this many milliseconds. So you could kind of do some rough calculations. But the other thing is that the wild card is if someone's using a slower computer or has a slower connection, then that changes the latency number and so forth. But
if anyone else is on their PS4 somewhere else in the house.
Oh no, this sounds like the next Flaming Lips experimental album. They would be ones to do like their new internet latency project.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get a chance to see that HBO, the new David Byrne concert film that's out. And I'm not sure how much distancing they did, but it sounds pretty interesting. I heard some of the reviews, but
now with this online jamming, what's the video component that people are using to actually, because looking at each other is such a, it's 90% of the communication or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that wasn't Jam Kazam trying to do video?
There is a video component, but surely that messes with your bandwidth, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, and SoundJack has a video component also, the one that runs in the browser in the Chrome window. And one of the nice things about the SoundJack video is it gives you a lot of adjustability. You can say, make my video the size of an icon and make it black and white. And that cuts down on the amount of data. So that's another point in favor of SoundJack. I tried to try it out with Chris, but it was Firefox only, and it doesn't work on Firefox at all. So you have to have Chrome going. But so that's another. One of the things that I didn't make more of this earlier in the presentation, but I mean, I found with Chris that it just was essential to have two channels of communication, one being the music and the other being talking about the music. So we would typically have a Zoom connection going with the sound turned off while we communicated through the program. And then if the program acted up, then we could turn the sound on and talk to each other, or we could chat, and that worked out pretty well. Or even just a video phone call, a Skype call, anything like that would work as the second channel. I think that's another kind of general principle in all of this stuff, is that you have a kind of a lower quality control channel and then a high quality content channel. That shows up all sorts of places.
Did having a Zoom session open, did that affect your latency significantly?
It didn't seem to, and part of it was that the data was using two different sorts of connection.
I see.
The Zoom's going through TCP, and then the sound is going through UDP, and then we're good. So I'm not sure how much. We didn't really do a ton of. By the time we got around to getting Jamulus working, we'd been through so many underbenches with trying to get his Windows audio working right, and it took me forever to finally discover that my clock source had to be sent to. I had to be set to the virtual channel, so by the time we got to that point, we were like, our eyes were running down our faces, and it was not pretty. But so we didn't do thorough testing, but I'm definitely grateful to him for putting up with the computer fatigue to do this. So,
well, you've certainly saved. I'm sure you've saved me many hours and bottles of whiskey.
Yeah. Send one of them over. I'll take you up on any offers. Trying to think of anything else. Anybody else tried doing anything online with people? I was saying to Gene, I've been doing a fair amount of virtual theater. I'm working on my second virtual production in DC right now. And the time factors, dealing with the time factors are really interesting, because they do theirs through Zoom. And they've found that if you have actors speaking lines where they have to talk over each other, you have to record one line and back up and record the other line and then put it together later in Final Cut or so forth. So we're discovering all sorts of weird ways of turning time into silly putty.
I recently learned that Zoom has a high fidelity music mode.
Yes.
Oh, really?
I even remember. Oh, do I sound different now? Because I just turned on the original sound.
Yeah.
Everybody know how to find that?
No, how do you find that?
Yeah, you go to the sound preferences, and then there's an advanced button, and you click that, and it has a thing that says enable turn on original sound, and you get a little button up in your video window which gives you much clearer sound. It also bypasses some of the compression and gating, I think. I watched a rehearsal last night, and they had the original sound turned on, and it was still pretty choppy, because the actors get farther from the mic and it would cut out and so forth. But how you doing, Ian?
I'm good. So I missed most of the meat of this, but I'm looking forward to reading the PDF and going back over the recording.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. I was sort of hoping more people would turn up for this, but I wouldn't mind getting some sort of interest group going that we could try around with this stuff.
Yeah, count me in, because I really haven't been doing much, but I'd like to. Like I've been playing in the backyard a little bit, and that's all right. And I did a field recording basically in the backyard. I had to do a piece for a upcoming concert, and it's like I couldn't even fathom the idea of not only getting myself you know, together with some of this technology, but getting the other players that I needed to record, like, how am I going to get them set up? No way. So I brought all my gear out to somebody's backyard and we recorded this string trio. You know, it's time to get serious about. It's like figuring out some of this stuff and how to make it work for me.
Yeah, it's tricky. There's all kinds of strange, factors, and I know that some of my friends, and Mind on Fire is an organization I'm friends with who do new classical music, and they did some Twitch sessions. But the problem is, like, the singers are all projecting as though they're in an opera, in a concert hall, and it was just blowing out the mic. So there's a whole different set of skills to learn. It's almost like actors have to pretend they were acting for a film, because you can get really close to the mic and pick up everything, or you can do all sorts of tricks that way.
How many people were on that Mind on Fire?
Mind on Fire is an orchestra, so there's a bunch of people. Oh, in terms of the stream.
Yeah, the stream that you were trying to do.
It was a stream that do you know Rhizome in Tacoma Park? Yeah, Rhizome hosted it, and they invited the Mind on Fire people. So the two directors, James Young and Allison Clendaniel, were performing. So it wasn't a big group. It was just the two of them in their house, Zooming or connecting over Twitch, I guess.
I mean, it does seem like something beautiful to see, even as a spectator. If you opened up a Zoom type gallery view and it was the orchestra, and it was all on you. I mean, that sounds
it's just a matter of how
sublime,
to get because the latency in Zoom is, being in the meeting, it sounds to us like it's fairly instantaneous, but the latency is actually 3 or 4 seconds on Zoom, so it's pretty long.
And that's tough with the live music, even when you're just watching a live band play. They're all together and you're just watching the music. There are a few moments where, when their movement isn't the same as what you're hearing, and it really feels like that, like a glitch in the Matrix. Your brain's just like, and it only has to be. It's so interesting how sensitive you have to be, and I play music and things, but even just my husband doesn't play music, and the human brain picks up on those things in a nanosecond.
Well, that's where conductors came from when orchestras finally got large enough that the delay from the orchestra to the last player was enough that it was comparable to the kind of delays we're seeing in this software. 30 feet. You figure speed of sound is roughly equal to 1 millisecond per foot of delay. So if you're 15 feet away from me, then my sound's reaching you 15 milliseconds later. It's a good rule of thumb. It's not exact, but it's slightly less than a millisecond per foot. Well, good.
That's good.
Well, you can certainly keep me in the loop if you're looking to experiment with these things. Would it be okay to put my info in the chat, or?
Yeah. You can put yours in, and I'll put my email address in, and
is it okay if I share that document that we posted online? I guess it is, because it's posted online.
I meant for that to
some
be
friends
public.
It's posted on the website.
Public. Anybody should be able to get that.
Yeah, I put the link in the chat, and I have a friend actually who works. He lives here in Dundalk, but he's put out a couple really heavy metal band albums with people from the Netherlands, and it's really popular over there. And I think he'd enjoy some of this. I don't know if they've done anything live together. That is just layering and trading tracks that they've done before. But
yeah. Well, look for a bluegrass band called Gangsta Grass.
Gangsta Grass?
It's
okay.
Half bluegrass, half hip hop.
I would love it.
God, they are going great guns. And they made an album like in April over the internet.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was the one? I had an album a couple years ago that was Fade to Bluegrass. It was an all Metallica cover bluegrass band.
Oh, there's a
Well,
guy. Oh, there's a young guy.
That's Hayseed Dixie.
Is that?
There's a band. Yeah.
There's a young guy. Oh, I wish I could think of his name off the top of my head. But if you Google heavy metal banjo, you'll get this guy doing heavy metal covers with a bluegrass band, and he did it sort of as a joke for quite a while, and then, by golly, the last thing I saw from him, he just kind of got bored with the jokes and did some kind of serious playing and songwriting, and I was like, this is pretty darn good. It's very interesting that all of his joking around has broadened his horizons to where he's really making some interesting music. Yeah.
Yeah, that's that same friend of mine that does the metal. We've been friends since high school, and he's always been into metal. And when he discovered bluegrass, he said, "This is the death metal of country music."
Yeah,
Like, that's what it is. I mean, the jamming
speed metal. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
And
it's speed metal of country music.
I've been to some bluegrass festivals where they play, Train 45 for literally 45 minutes, and I was with them. I was there. I was at a bluegrass festival with a friend of mine, and he said, the bluegrass motto is, if it's worth playing, it's worth running completely into the ground. And yeah, that seems about right. I've decided my next thing is I want to conquer heavy metal French horn. I think that's gonna be my new genre.
Oh, I like it.
I just realized that actually the sound of the horn, and if you ran it through some effects, you could actually do some really nice things with heavy metal bass lines.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. Does anybody else watch David Bruce's Facebook channel, YouTube channel? He's a composer.
I've seen some of his things. Yes.
Yeah, he did a thing where he commissioned a heavy metal piece from 4 different classical composers, and that came out pretty interesting. Although my friends who are heavy metal purists are all like, yeah, that's silly, but I liked it, and that sort of gave me the idea. So, but anyway, well, thank you everybody for coming. This has been great. I'm going to be sure.
Thank you for doing it. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry the crowd wasn't bigger, but I think anyone who was here probably got a lot of good advice.
Good.
Yeah, very much. I very much appreciate the presentation, and I learned some things today.
Yeah, well, good. Tell UMBC hello next time you're out at the campus. Then.
Yeah. Well, it's like I'm always there now.
Yeah, right. I'm sure. Yeah. Now that your school's in session and you're teaching everything in virtual.
Yeah. It's just I'm just always there. It feels like.
Well, let me know anything that happens in terms of setting up setting up a private server, and let me know how your mileage is on that, and anything I can do in terms of answering questions. I'd be happy to.
Great. Yeah, very much appreciate it.
All right. Well, Jean, say hi to your neighbors for me.
Oh, I will. I'll see them soon, probably.
All righty.
All right. Take care.
Y'all
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
See ya.
Good night.